Hey guys, so today I wanted to make a little online lecture about the development of the reproductive systems. So let's see here. That's what we're going to talk about. And so this is really how, a fertilized zygote becomes either a male embryo or a female embryo. And actually, this occurs right away. So the determination of the sex of the embryo is determined right at fertilization, and this is kind of how this works. So let me shrink this down a little bit, and let's focus on this. All right, so imagine that we have a female and a male, okay? And females obviously are female because they have two X chromosomes. So humans have 23 pairs of two chromosomes, and one of those pairs of chromosomes are called the sex chromosomes. If those sex chromosomes are both X chromosomes, that means that that person is a female. And if that person has one X chromosome and one Y chromosome, that person is a male. That's really what determines male versus female. Okay? So imagine we have two people here. We have a female and a male. What that means is that this female, because of her two X chromosomes, she can only produce eggs that have an X chromosome because that's all she has to give, right? So all of her eggs will have this X chromosome as a result of meiosis. In contrast, the male, when that male undergoes spermatogenesis to produce sperm, about half of those sperm will contain the X chromosome that male had, and the other half will contain the Y chromosome that that male had. Okay, this is kind of how it divides up. Now, what this means is that all of the eggs from females are going to have the X chromosome. About half the sperm from males are going to have the X chromosome. So that means about half the fertilizations will result in zygotes with XX, which are female, and the other half of fertilizations are going to result in zygotes that have XY chromosomes, which are males. And that's literally why half of the babies born are female and half the babies born are males, right? It's just because of how those chromosomes kind of divide up. Okay. So let's imagine that this little egg or this zygote right here resulted from a Y sperm that fertilized an egg, resulting in an XY male zygote. Okay, right? Like you said, this was determined right from the first fertilization because this zygote now has XY chromosomes, which means it's a male. All right, so there is a certain gene on this Y chromosome, and it's called the SRY gene. And really that just stands for the sex-determining region on the Y chromosome. Obviously, this is a male zygote, so it is positive for this SRY gene. What this SRY gene is going to do is it's going to cause this embryo to start producing this growth factor called TDF, which stands for testes determining factor. Okay. This is really going to kickstart the development of the male reproductive system. And what it does is going to stimulate the gonad in this embryo to form into testes. Okay, and if we remember from like the first day of class, as the testes form, this is going to cause the seminiferous tubules to form within the testes. Those are literally the structures that will later produce sperm. It's going to cause the rete testes to form. That's that network of tubes also in the testes. And it's going to also cause the Leydig cells to develop within the testes. Those are important because those are the very cells that are going to produce testosterone throughout that male's life. And finally, the testes are going to start producing these Sertoli cells. Sertoli cells are important for males because they produce MIF, which stands for Mullerian inhibiting factor. This is essentially a growth factor that inhibits the female womb from developing because that's the last thing a male would want to happen. Okay. Let's go back to testosterone, okay? Once testosterone is being formed by these Leydig cells, this testosterone is really going to dominate the development of the male genitalia, which later forms after week 5 to 6, okay? So testosterone really takes over at about week 5, week 6, and that is going to drive the later development of all the external male genitalia that males will exhibit. If we go back to the females, okay, females, remember, female zygotes are going to have two X chromosomes, and they are not going to have this SRY gene because they don't have a Y chromosome, right? That means they will not get any TDF released. If there's no TDF released, that will allow the Müllerian or the female duct to develop. It will develop into the ovaries. The ovaries contain the ovarian follicles, which will help nourish the immature eggs or the oocytes, which are inside each follicle. As the follicles develop, they will produce estrogen, and the development of this estrogen will then drive the development of the female genitalia. Okay, so it's really the absence of TDF which allows the female reproductive anatomy to form. All right, so that's good. Now, before we kind of go any further, I wanted to pull up another image. This is an image of kind of a cross section of a 4-week-old embryo. All right, and we've seen this image a couple of times in this class. Blue is ectoderm, red is mesoderm, and green is endoderm. We've got the gut tube there, right? We've already formed the body cavities, right? Where we have this splanchnic mesoderm that forms the outer kind of layer of the body cavity. We have the somatic mesoderm, which forms the outer layer of the body cavity, with the splanchnic mesoderm, which forms the mesoderm that wraps around the gut tube. We have the neural tube right here that's already been forming. Obviously, that's formed out of ectoderm. And then we have the paraxial mesoderm, which is right beside the neural tube. And we also had the intermediate mesoderm, which is now forming into the nephrogenic cord. Now, this little kind of bump that's formed underneath the nephrogenic cord, that's called the urogenital ridge. That was really important when we talked about the development of the kidneys, but it's also going to be important when we're talking about the development of the reproductive systems like we are today, because this part of this urogenital ridge is going to develop into the reproductive pathways and the reproductive structures in both males and females. Right? So it's the combination of this nephrogenic cord, which is developed from intermediate mesoderm. As it kind of grew, it made this little ridge in the splanchnic mesoderm, and that's called the urogenital ridge. All right, and that's what we're going to kind of focus on now from a different view. So let me move this out of the way, and let's move over here. So here's essentially what we're looking at. So now we're looking at the ventral view of a 5-week-old embryo, and this is the tail or the caudal end of the embryo. Here are the two developing legs. In red, we have the developing gonads, and in blue, we have this mesonephric duct. Okay, that's part of the developing urinary system. Now, in pink, this is the Müllerian duct, which will go on to later form the female womb in females. And in orange, we have this structure called the gubernaculum. It's this fibrous kind of collection of tissue, which is going to pull the different structures later into place. Okay, so at week 5, at this stage, there's no difference in the anatomy between males and females. Remember, the sex was determined upon fertilization, but both males and females will develop identically up to about week 5. And this is what this structure looks like. So there hasn't been a difference in how males and females develop up to this point. We have the gonads here. The gonads are connected to this mesonephric duct. That was part of the mesonephros, which was associated with the development of the urinary system, and then you had the Müllerian duct. Okay, now let's look at what happens when a male. Here, this is what we'll do. I'm going to switch this over here. Now this is a different kind of view, and it shows what happens differently when a male is going to develop on the left and a female, how that develops on the right. Remember, a male is going to develop after that TDF, that testes determining factor, is released, which is going to drive the development of the testes. That causes this red gonad to form into the testes, starts producing those seminiferous tubules, and it starts producing those Leydig cells, which are then going to produce testosterone. That mesonephric duct in blue is then going to become the epididymis and the vas deferens, because those are the tubes that ultimately are going to connect to the testes, which carry the sperm out of the testes and into the pelvic cavity, where it'll later meet up with the fluid from the accessory glands. Okay, so that mesonephric duct, that turns into the epididymis and the vas deferens. And then what's going to happen is that further caudally, the caudal end of this mesonephric duct is going to become the seminal gland, which will later become the seminal vesicle in the adult in the adult male. Okay. It's still attached to this orange gubernaculum, and that gubernaculum is going to have a really important job of pulling the testicle downwards until ultimately it is pulled into the testicle, right, outside of the body. So the gubernaculum is responsible for pulling the testes caudally until it finally drops into place into the testicle at birth or by birth. Okay. Now, let's see here. That's going to be different from what happens when a female develops. So, in the absence of testosterone, that is going to allow the gonad to form into an ovary. That's what we see here. Instead of, without the Müllerian inhibiting factor that was secreted by those Sertoli cells, this Müllerian duct is going to develop into the female womb. Specifically, it's going to form into the uterus down here, and then the fallopian tube is going to be the part of the Müllerian duct that reaches up and grabs onto the ovary. Okay, the gubernaculum again is going to pull these structures downwards into the pelvic cavity, not as far down as it does for males, but it's still going to help position those structures. Now, there's a couple things to notice here in the female reproductive system. Obviously, the female womb, which consists of the ovary, the fallopian tube, and the uterus, is separate from the urethra, and we have the bladder here in green, whereas in the male reproductive system, the vas deferens is going to come down here and connect to the urethra, so they share that tube for both urine and for ejaculate later on in life. All right. Here's just a little drawing showing you how that gubernaculum is going to pull that testes down caudally until it finally is pulled into the testicle. That happens by birth. And if it does not occur within the first 2 months, that's called an undescended testicle, and that can be fixed surgically. But it is important to fix any undescended testicles, because that would lead to improper reproductive health. It doesn't lead to proper spermatogenesis because the temperature is too high, right? So the whole reason testicles have evolved is to allow the sperm to be housed at a cooler temperature. Okay. Another interesting thing to mention is that in the yolk sac of the developing embryo, we have these primordial germ cells. These are going to be the cells that produce the first sperm and egg. Obviously, sperm in males, eggs in females. What they do is they migrate from the yolk sac and they go all the way to the gonads during this developmental process. And these primordial germ cells are going to be the ones that divide to produce sperm, and then in females they divide to produce eggs. All right. So hopefully this was a little bit helpful. It shows how both males and females anatomically start off identically up until week 5 or 6, then they start to diverge to produce the different structures associated with the male and female reproductive systems. All right, thank you.